A very warm welcome from the fabulous British Library here in central London to all of you, wherever you're joining us from tonight. The foyer of the library might not be filled with small talk and the clinking of champagne glasses tonight, as it would be in another year, but the Rathbones Folio Prize still wanted to bring you here to its traditional home for the finale. My name's Razia Iqbal and I'm delighted to host you for this evening's ceremony. You'll meet the 8 wonderful authors shortlisted for the prize and get an exclusive look behind the scenes from our 2021 judges who had the monumental task of whittling down 80 books to this shortlist of 8 and ultimately the one winner. The winner will be announced live by the Chair of Judges, Roger Robinson, in just over half an hour. Before we celebrate the 8 books that are in the running for the £30,000 prize this year, here are a few words from Paul Stockton, CEO of Rathbone Investment Management, the generous sponsor of the prize.
Thank you, Razia, and a good evening, everybody. My name's Paul Stockton and I'm CEO of Rathbones, proud sponsors of the Rathbones Folio Prize. For the last 5 years, time really has flown. After spending time with 8 delighted finalists only a few weeks ago, I'm very excited that tonight we'll finally discover which of their tremendous books will receive the Rathbones Folio Prize for the best work of literature for the year. And of course, which author will receive the £30,000 prize. Now, as well as the prize itself, this evening is also about learning something of the other activities the Rathbone Folio team are engaged in. When we were first approached about involvement in the prize, it was not only its objective, but also the vision to support writers at all stages of their careers through a 300-strong Folio Academy that really excited us. Now, the more we can all do to nurture young talent and cherish our hugely important booksellers, the better it is for society and for us all, particularly in more recent times. My thanks as ever go to the hard-working team who've put the evening together in not the easiest of circumstances, to Fane Productions, FMCM, the Rathbones Folio team here and of course elsewhere, the British Library and the prize judges, importantly, who've given us so much of their time. It's no mean feat to reduce a list of 80 titles down to just one, but I look forward to this evening to getting some insight into their decision making and how on earth they came down to just one book. I hope that you have a wonderful evening and very much look forward to celebrating with you in real life at next year's award. Now though, let us move on to the most important parts of this evening's event. Back to you, Razia.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm standing now in front of the world-famous King's Library, founded by King George III in the late 18th century. It consists of 65,000 books and pamphlets, including the first edition of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales and the Magna Carta. Even today, publishers are legally obliged to send one copy of every single book published in the UK to be kept on record here at the British Library. Somewhere in here, there will be pristine copies of these 8 shortlisted books, in the words of the judges and in alphabetical order. Sara Baume's handiwork is a meditation on how we spend our time, what is its value, and how do we shape it into objects or art. A book not written with the pandemic in mind, but like all the best artists, Sara Baume speaks intimately to the strange and isolated times that we now live in. Indelicacy by Amina Cain is a novel that picks its way through ideas of class, desire, and how to be in the world. A masterclass in distillation in sustained, precise prose. Elaine Feeney's As You Were explores the impact of historical trauma, illness and community, but with a darkly comic theme running through it. Told from multiple viewpoints and often in fragments, stream of consciousness and text messages, it makes for a modern polyphonic fable. The first collection from a former Young People's Laureate for London, Caleb Femi's Poor, crackles with longing and loss, with pride and hope, with young love and old wounds, with images of concrete and peacocks and broken glass and dragon stout and Air Max 90s. My Darling from the Lions by Rachel Long is another debut collection of poems which call out from the page, tackling family, religion, sexual politics, cultural inheritance, gaffer-taped toilets and sugared almonds that come in various shades of dawn. The arrival of a strikingly vivid and confident voice. It feels inaccurate to call Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House a memoir, because it upends and deconstructs what's possible with that particular form. Machado explores queerness, domestic violence and bodies to remake a multi-genre memoir drawing on structures of romance novels, choose-your-own adventure plots and lesbian pulp. In A Ghost in the Throat, Dirin Ní Ghríofa explores a famous 18th century Irish language poem within the story of her own life as a writer and mother. It is a powerful book about literature and language, about the patient process of translation, the joy and grief of parenthood, and about the ongoing attempt to erase too many women from history. And Monique Roffey's The Mermaid of Black Conch, a new Caribbean myth that feels as ancient as the very beginning of oral storytelling. The monumental task of finding that liminal space between the ancient and the modern is done so seamlessly that she will have you think you always knew this story deep down in the marrow of your bones. Now, as you may know, one of the unique things about the Rathbones Folio Prize is that the books are nominated and then judged only by other writers. Members of the 300-strong Folio Academy nominate their favourite books of the year written in English, but from anywhere in the world, and the 80 most nominated titles go through to the judges. This is why it's also known as the Writers' Prize. It's also the only one to judge all genres of literature, regardless of form, which seems more relevant than ever today. Indeed, this year's shortlist includes poetry, poetry with photographs, memoir, autofiction, and novels. Here are the 2021 judges: the T.S. Eliot Prize-winning poet Roger Robinson, the Irish writer, editor and broadcaster Sinéad Gleeson, and the novelist and short story writer John McGregor, to tell you more.
Hey John, hey Sinead.
Hey Roger.
Are you guys all right?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Nice. One of the things that struck me about the reading of all the books, the 80 books, was the nonfiction. And how nonfiction, I mean, I used to read some nonfiction. I was never a big nonfiction reader, but I used to read nonfiction back in the day. But it was always about nonfiction, for me, was a lot about getting the information over and trying to inform you and keep you well informed. Now, nonfiction to me, it seems like rock and roll. You know, it seems like, wow, some of the best stories being told in nonfiction. I mean, told in the most innovative ways, far more innovative, that I think, than novels or poetry, you know. That was a shocker for me, you know.
Yeah, I think I was shortlisted for the prize last year, and it's one of the few prizes where that allows nonfiction to compete alongside novels and short stories. Is one of the things I love about the prize. You get all these multiple forms and genres of work, you know, poetry, short stories, nonfiction, memoir, all in the same kind of race. And I think that nonfiction itself has changed than what it used to be. People used to think it was either biography or history or memoir, and there's loads of in between bits for what that is now. And we saw a lot of it on this long list and short list this year.
Mm.
Yeah,
I'm
going to stick up for fiction.
Yeah.
Sorry, Roger, I'm going to stick up for fiction just a little bit. I think there was some really innovative, exciting fiction on the list of books that we read this year,
right?
As well.
Yeah.
But you're right. That there was, what I really loved about judging this prize was to kind of read above the categories, and just I was looking for excitement. I was looking for freshness. I was looking for story, but in a much bigger sense than just fiction. And it was there, yeah, all through the list.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sense that people are really trying to reach for new ways to show you things in the fiction, in the poetry, and in the nonfiction. It's like the forms are so, you know, they were so sometimes peculiar, sometimes idiosyncratic, but sometimes you're just like, wow, I don't think I'll ever see that thing the same way again. And so everybody's trying to find new ways to let you see a story as opposed to just telling you the story. And I found that really interesting in the 80 books. I find when I was reading, there are some books that like, okay, I'm going to give this book 1.5 days. And I read it, and you said something else, John, and like 2 weeks later, you're still reading it, and you're like, you don't want to stop and put it down. And it's like, well, when a book grips you like that, you're like, wow, this is a really good book, you know. And of course, they had the opposite way. I was like, oh, this is going to be great. It's like, man, this is a complete disappointment. You know, it's like whatever you think before you start the book is something completely, it ended up being something completely different for me, you know.
Yeah, and I did wonder with a few books. So the thing I love about this prize as well is the way that you know, the books we read are all nominated by the other writers in the Academy.
Yeah, for sure.
And so every time I picked up a book, I was like, this is somebody else's favorite book of the year, you know. And
yes.
So that kind of gives it this presence, and then sometimes it doesn't connect, you know. And it's not always the fault of the book. It just sometimes it doesn't work for you. I don't know.
I think that's one of the joys of the prize as well. The fact that every year I kind of make a dash for those end of year lists to see what other writers have been recommending and reading. And this way we got to see that. We got to see what writers were reading. And it's always a kind of joy. People surprise you what turns up on lists like this. And I think something you said, Roger, a lot of the poetry that we saw this year was often quite experimental, often extremely current and reactive to things that are going on in the world at the moment. So they felt really vital and really kind of fizzy and energetic in many ways, and that was one of the things. A lot of the poetry this year really impressed me.
Mm-hmm. What was also interesting for me is that how sometimes I trust my instincts, and I'd be like, no, I think this is really good, and then one of you would be the specialist and say, okay, let me explain to you why this really isn't good. and I'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually think I'm going to go with the specialist on this one. You know, I like how not quickly I was turned around, but how the analysis of the craft was a particularly important part in it. Not just enjoyment, not just, as John put one in one email, not just the books that you want for your birthday. It's just like, okay, is this book talking to people, but is it talking to craft? Is it trying to do new things with story? What is it trying to do in the kind of current environment now, you know? So that was cool for me.
But I think the fact that the prize allows so many different types of books into it, that's where we know that our job is one job, which is to pick the best book. And
Sure.
Often, you know, you can't necessarily compare narrative in poetry and narrative in nonfiction or narrative in novels. So it's just which is the book that moved us, that enthralled us, that we thought was better than all the other books. And that's been really exciting. You judge it, you know, an all fiction prize or an all poetry prize in a completely different way. So I loved that.
Yeah. But also the diversity of our opinions, and also how similar some of our opinions were. That was at times scary for me. I'm like, wow, you know, it's certain books that we all chose, and they were all quite high up. I was like, well, we have some very different backgrounds. How did that happen? You know, what is it about that, and how universal a book may or may not be? You know.
Because we have excellent taste and are very discerning.
Of course. Impeccable, excellent taste. Yeah.
It's gonna get tasty though, isn't it? With the when we go from the shortlist to a winner. I think so far there's been a really nice kind of overlapping of our specialisms and our interests and our taste and you know, and the consensus has been, that's been quite exciting to see. But I suspect when we have our final discussion that's picking a single winner out of this fantastic shortlist of books is going to be really difficult.
I'm now on the first floor looking down on the iconic entrance hall. As the largest public building constructed in 20th century Britain, the architect Sir Colin St John Wilson, MJ Long and their teams wanted visitors to feel immediately invited as they walked in, rather than taken aback by its sheer scale. To prevent visitors being overwhelmed and apparently to keep them awake, the architects relied heavily on natural light to produce the effect of the building opening up like a flower on entering. Time for us to open up our 8 shortlisted authors. Here they are, talking about what drove them to write their books, what genre means to them, life under lockdown, and what might be next. Meet our 2021 Rathbones Folio Prize authors.
Life under lockdown has been such a bizarre experience. There have been moments of like illumination where ideas are like circling, orbiting my head, and then I have to write, and I'm very much inspired. And then there have been
What I find is it's so quiet. It's so quiet. I live in the countryside here in the west of Ireland. So my mind isn't as frantic and racing. So I did write. I have been writing a second novel, but it's a whole different thing. And you're very much living inside your own head at the moment, and in that sort of introverted space, maybe.
I think last April and May were probably the scariest months I've been through in a long time. And so I was very frozen. I had been writing a crime novel for a long time. And but eventually I think I thawed out a bit. It's very telling, isn't it, when you're going through such a global existential crisis. I think a lot of writers must be thinking, well, what am I writing about? You know, how can anything I write compare to what we're going through?
In the beginning of the pandemic, I was asking myself, you know, does writing matter? Does my writing matter right now? And I know that I probably can't write about the things I was writing about before, you know, that it will inevitably be different.
So yeah, in a way it was like the book came true for me. Even with the birds, you know, everyone over here in Ireland definitely became very interested in putting out bird feeders and looking at what came to their garden, because this was the only drama going on, you know. So no, my partner and I, who's sort of depicted in the book, many times we've sort of looked at each other and shaken our heads and gone, it feels almost like we've spent the last 10 years creating a lifestyle for ourselves that would sort of make us bulletproof in case of a pandemic, even though of course we never could have possibly known it.
There are some people I talk to that are bored out of their mind in this time, and I feel for them so much, because as writers and as readers, at least we can't be bored during this time, you know. It's just like, well, you got that shelf that you were going to read, all those pile of books that you kept on buying new ones to stack them even higher.
So genre and form are sort of very central to my process in a lot of ways. And so I think for me, fiction, where you can sort of experiment in terms of reality, and you can fuss with it in these various ways, I think is a good first step for me for like writing about a subject that I'm interested in broaching for myself. And then nonfiction is like the next step. It's like the step that I can take after I've sort of paved the way with fiction.
I'm used to writing very whittled kind of form within a poem, like compressed language into lyric poetry. So the adventure of this book in some ways for me involved exploding my own artistic practice to allow myself to explore something much bigger. And that's a little bit frightening sometimes for an author, you know.
Yeah, I particularly admire prizes like this that are multi-genre, that are open to all, and that there aren't, that we can move between if we want as writers. Some of the best writers I know don't know actually what they're writing. It takes someone else, like their agent or their editor, to be like, oh, let's market this as a novel. So actually, perhaps as writers, maybe we are less concerned, or from where the writing comes from, it doesn't as strictly dictate which kind of form or genre it is.
For me, poetry sort of, it comes along and I have to listen to it. But with writing fiction, I suppose you have that thing where you just have to sit down every day and put one sentence in front of another. So I alternate a little bit between the two. And so I've been working quite diligently on the novel. I think I have this sense of guilt that we have all this time now, so I should produce something.
As a fiction writer, I'm very interested in the possibilities of the form. That said, I love poetry, and I feel in relationship to poetry when I write. I think a lot about language and sentences.
If you write well, it doesn't matter what you're writing. You can describe anything in the world, and if you write it well enough, people will read it. And that's how I work as a reader as well, I suppose. I just want to read good writing, and I want to make the connections myself and not be told what it is or where I should be going with it or how I should understand it.
Well, I believe that writing is a form of integrity and activism. If you just look around, look at the folio long list and the shortlist. I mean, it's full of activism, isn't it? So, this idea that the pen is mightier than the sword, I would agree with.
To tell you the truth, writing has been, I don't want to say a comfort, but it has certainly been part of my life that I have come back to, almost like a drowning person, like grasping a piece of wood that they find in the body of water that they're immersed in. I have gripped on to writing and have continued to write throughout all the strangeness of the past year and the sorrow and the intense grief. And I have never felt more lucky in my whole life to be a writer than I have in recent times.
We should always make good art. Good art can, in some ways it can prevent some catastrophe, by expanding people's imaginations and generating empathy. There are ways in which art is always important.
I believe so much in documentation and in archiving for the future generation, because I think that this is how we make sure that lessons are learned, and this is how we also empower future generations to make better decisions than we did.
What a phenomenal group of writers. Now, the Rathbones Folio Prize is, of course, a literary prize, but as Paul Stockton mentioned earlier, it is much more than that. Before we hand over to Roger Robinson to announce this year's winner, let's take a brief look at the Rathbones Folio Prize mentorships, where members of the Folio Academy are paired with young writers who are outstanding graduates of the First Story scheme in schools. 5 years in, with 16 alumni to the scheme, here is award-winning poet, teacher and mentor par excellence, Kate Clanchy, to tell us a little more.
My name's Kate Clanchy and I'm a writer and a teacher and a former chair of the Rathbones Folio Prize. And I wanted to talk to you for a minute about the Rathbones Folio mentorship schemes. Now the Rathbones Folio mentorship schemes work with a charity called First Story, who I worked with for a number of years. First Story go into disadvantaged schools and they really pick their schools carefully, and they place a writer there to work with the young people. And that work is truly transformational in many ways. It's not just the sitting around the table and writing and the therapeutic aspect of self-expression. It's a sort of sense of power that having a writer, and of course writers aren't rich people, but they are endowed with cultural capital, they can be heard in the world. It's a transformational thing to have someone like that in a school where so many people feel they can't be heard. And it's amazing how fast young people can learn and what they can produce. There's one little snag with First Story though, which is that you can have very happy 16-year-old groups, but then you're not quite sure what to do with the 17-year-olds. It's very easy to lose a 17-year-old. If you remember being 17, it's very easy to lose your sense of who you are and your confidence at that time, especially if you're disadvantaged. Rathbones Folio Mentorship does something really, really special. It takes those young people, the talented ones, the ones with the commitment, and pairs them up with a writer, and you can see some of the stellar names going across the screens now. The writers are stellar writers, and their writers are also having a good time, because of course writers want to work with young people, and they do work with young people all the time, but very often they're asked to give an awful lot of their time for nothing. And the Rathbones Folio Mentorships doesn't do that. It rewards people, and believe me, the writers give so much more back for that. The young people blossom on this scheme. So I've seen that in their writing. I've seen that when I've been to the showcases. They blossom in self-confidence. They start to feel that they're important. They start to feel that they'll be heard, and they start to shape their words. And it happened for a student of mine. So Aisha Borja, who is of Colombian heritage and also very dyslexic, because she was blossoming into poetry, but she wanted to read aloud, and actually she couldn't even read her own work back because she was so dyslexic, and she was really lacking in confidence. She was lucky enough to get onto the Rathbones Folio scheme, and she worked for a year with the performance poet Francesca Beard. And I couldn't believe it when I came to the showcase and saw Aisha taking the stage and owning the stage. And she's gone on from there to be an undergraduate at Queen Mary College London, and she's still writing. She's gained in so many ways. And I know that Aisha's story is reproduced in so many of the mentees. And Francesca, who is still in touch with Aisha, and the joy she took in that is reproduced in so many of the mentors. This is such a carefully thought out, solid gold scheme. I really commend it to you.
And now the moment we have all been waiting for. It is my great pleasure to hand you over to Roger Robinson to announce the winner of the Rathbones Folio Prize 2021.
Thank you, Razia. Hello to everyone watching. Hello to our shortlisted authors. We are very sorry that Dorian can't be with us tonight for family reasons, but it's lovely to see you all. We, the judges, would like to congratulate every one of you on this shortlist. We have had the privilege of living with your books for an extended time, and we are grateful for all of your work. I'd also like to thank the Rathbones Folio Prize and everyone involved for their support of writers and readers. Unfortunately, we could only choose one book, and it was an incredibly hard task, but we've done it. Before the final announcement, let me reintroduce you to the books on the shortlist. Sarah Baume's Handiwork speaks intimately to the strange and isolated times that we now live in, a meditation on working with your hands. It's a beautiful blueprint for a personal culture of creativity. Indelicacy by Amina Cain is one of the most stylistically striking fictions I've read for a while. One part Octavia Butler world building, one part Clarice Lispector's plotless genius, one part David Lynch Twin Peaks. Elaine Feeney's novel, As You Were, is a smart take on Irish society through the lens of illness and failure of a hospital ward. It's an important and massive project shot through with dark humor. Caleb Femi's Paw is like a fairy tale ode to Peckham from the point of view of a young Black man from Peckham Estates. In this book, Caleb shows there's an underlying richness to what certain people may perceive as poor. My Darling from the Lions by Rachel Long documents the dangers to Black girlhood and womanhood, racism, classism, misogynistic men. She combines a clear, clean register with startling imagery, and we get the feeling that the way of seeing is in itself a mode of protection. Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House documents the descent of lives into obsessiveness, possession, and eventually abuse amongst a couple from the queer community. It's challenging, but it's in its challenging of the memoir form that makes this a substantial work that's even more impressive. A Ghost in the Throat by Dorian Negriofa is a hybrid work that weaves together elements of autobiography, memoir, and literary criticism. Dorian lets the work of an all-Irish poet possess her, all the while tracing her own in the most beautiful of languages. The Mermaid of Black Conch by Monique Roffey is a new Caribbean myth that feels as ancient as the very beginning of oral storytelling. Its modernity comes from the way it weaves in fresh ideas on gender, sexuality, ecology, migration, and transfiguration. These are 8 outstanding works of literature, and I encourage you to read each and every one of them. In the end, Sinéad, John, and myself all agreed on our one winner. We found this to be an exceptional, important book. It's a striking piece of storytelling and a work of art. It's a story that had to be told, and it's being told here in the most innovative way you can imagine. It is my pleasure to announce that the winner of the Rathbones Folio Prize 2021 is Carmen Maria Machado, In the Dream House. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I am incredibly honored. Sorry, I'm incredibly honored to receive this award. Thank you so much to the other finalists, whose books are absolutely extraordinary. Thank you very much to the brilliant judges Roger Robinson, Sinéad Gleeson, and John McGregor, the Rathbone Investment Management for sponsoring the prize, the Rathbone Folio Prize team, the wonderful folks at my publishers, Serpent's Tail in the UK and Grey Wolf in the US, my agent, Kent Wolf, and my partners, Val and Marnie, and my wonderful readers. I could not have done any of this without you. Thank you very much.
So there we have it, a wonderful, wonderful winner. Many congratulations. I hope you've enjoyed the evening, and may I urge you to read all the amazing books on this year's shortlist. Thanks again for joining us tonight here at the British Library. Goodbye.